The chamber hums with a restless energy, a low electric buzz beneath the polished wood and heavy velvet drapes. Cameras perched like hawks along the balcony rail, lenses glinting under harsh fluorescent lights. Every seat is filled, every corridor lined, the air thick with the scent of coffee and anticipation. Representative Jasmine Crockett leans forward, a quiet force in a sea of murmurs. Her eyes, sharp as cut glass, sweep the room and land on Charlie Kirk. He shifts in his chair, shoulders tight, a faint smirk playing at the corner of his mouth, as if confidence alone can hold back the tide. A single sheet of paper slides from Crockett's folder. The microphones catch the faint rasp, a sound that slices through the chatter. She begins to read, her voice measured but resonant. "This is your tweet, Mr. Kirk, from April 12th. The words hang in the air, blunt, unmistakable, his own. Screens around the room flicker as reporters scramble to capture each syllable. Gasps ripple like a sudden wind through dry leaves. Kirk's smirk falters, replaced by the tightness of someone who thought the past had been scrubbed clean. Crockett doesn't pause. Another sheet emerges. And this one, deleted just hours after posting. The quote is sharper, more revealing, the kind of line that ignites 1,000 headlines. Phones lift higher, camera shutters fire in frantic bursts, strobing the chamber in white light. Whispers surge, staffers exchanging stunned glances, spectators leaning forward as if pulled by a magnetic force. Each sentence she reads feels heavier, like the clang of a gavel no one can silence. Kirk opens his mouth, then closes it again. His hands tighten around the edge of the table, knuckles pale. The room smells of ozone, of tension sparking against marble and oak. Crockett's final words land with the precision of a verdict. Your record may vanish from your feed, but it cannot vanish from the truth. Silence follows, deep and echoing, as though the walls themselves are holding their breath. Reporters glance at one another, eyes wide, aware they are witnessing a political earthquake in real time. But this was only the first crack in a wall that was about to collapse.
Millions were watching live, but none could predict how deep the receipts would cut. What began as another D.C. hearing, the kind that usually drifts past the evening news ticker, had suddenly become a confrontation that tapped into the very core of America's political soul. Charlie Kirk wasn't just any witness. To his followers, he was the swaggering voice of a younger, sharper conservative movement, social media fluent, endlessly confident, and skilled at turning outrage into fuel. For years, he had built a digital empire by hurling bold claims and then erasing the trail when those claims threatened to backfire. Deleted tweets were his signature vanish act, a way to taunt and retreat before consequences could catch him. Opposite him sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, the freshman lawmaker whose rise had already inspired countless young activists. A daughter of working-class strivers, a courtroom veteran, she carried herself with the kind of unshakable calm that comes from knowing the ground beneath your feet is solid. For her constituents, immigrants, organizers, families who felt invisible, this hearing was more than theater. It was a chance to prove that truth could still matter, even when distorted by algorithms and noise. The stakes stretched far beyond the ornate chamber walls. Every word was being streamed to millions of phones and screens across the country. In living rooms from Houston to Honolulu, families leaned closer, the glow of tablets illuminating wide eyes. In coffee shops and college lounges, students gathered around laptops, whispering in disbelief as each screenshot flickered across live feeds. The hashtag #ReceiptsDon'tDelete began climbing the trending charts before the second document was even read. What unfolded wasn't merely a clash of personalities, it was a referendum on accountability in the digital age. Could a public figure endlessly rewrite their record, or did the public have a right to hold them to their own words? Crockett's methodical reading of Kirk's deleted tweets was more than a gotcha. It was a declaration that erasure would no longer be a shield. Commentators on rival networks scrambled to frame the moment. Some called it an ambush, others a masterclass in oversight. But even those who bristled at Crockett's politics could not deny the power of the evidence, the simple authority of facts preserved and presented. Every deleted line became a mirror, reflecting a broader truth. The internet never forgets, and neither does a vigilant democracy. Kirk tried to reclaim the narrative with a practiced grin, but the room had shifted. Each attempt to deflect met the silent weight of Crockett's steady gaze. It wasn't anger that unnerved him. It was her composure, the quiet certainty that she stood for something larger than a single headline. Across the nation, viewers felt that certainty too. Immigrant parents saw in her poise a defense of their own hard-won place in America. Young organizers recognized the discipline of someone who had walked the long road from protest to policy. Even those tuning in by accident sensed that this was not the typical Beltway spectacle. This was a lesson unfolding in real time. In a country awash with spin and digital smokescreens, words still carried consequence. And as the hearing moved forward, the question no longer centered on whether Kirk had deleted tweets. It was whether the nation itself was ready to confront the culture of evasion he embodied. The crowd in the chamber shifted, leaning forward as if instinctively bracing for the next revelation. The cameras tightened their focus, ready to capture the fallout. Somewhere deep in the marble hall, a door creaked, a reminder that more revelations were on the way. Evidence waiting to crash through the silence and widen the fracture that had only just begun to form.
Charlie Kirk's public life began as a story of ambition wrapped in urgency. Barely out of high school, he founded a student political group that promised to give conservative youth a voice on campuses where they often felt outnumbered. He spoke quickly, smiled easily, and understood the power of a camera better than most seasoned politicians. In the early days, his energy drew admiration even from some who disagreed with him. Here was a teenager who could fill a ballroom with nothing but conviction and a microphone. But admiration soon gave way to notoriety. Kirk recognized that outrage traveled faster than reason. He became fluent in the rhythms of viral provocation, short, sharp posts designed to sting and spread. His Twitter feed became a laboratory of conflict, where each controversial statement was both a spark and a signal. The more critics fumed, the more followers he gained. By his mid-20s, he was a fixture on cable panels and podcast circuits, hailed by allies as a culture warrior and by detractors as a professional agitator. He thrived in the friction. When challenged, he pivoted effortlessly, turning confrontation into content. It was a performance art that rewarded audacity, and Kirk knew exactly how to play the role. Yet, alongside the boldness came a quieter, more calculated pattern. Tweets that crossed certain lines, comments that blurred into conspiracy, language that belittled whole communities often vanished within hours or days. Sometimes an apology followed, more often not. Observers began to notice the rhythm, a sudden spike of outrage, a quick deletion, and then a shrug, as if the words had never existed. Screenshots circulated, but the original posts were gone, replaced by a feed scrubbed clean. Critics accused him of gaslighting the public, of trying to rewrite history in real time. Supporters defended the deletions as tactical or trivial. Kirk himself offered shifting explanations, a staff error, a misunderstanding, a desire to refine the message. Whatever the reason, the pattern endured, leaving behind a digital trail of ghosts. The content of those vanished tweets varied: mocking remarks about marginalized groups, unverified claims about elections, flippant jokes that curdled under scrutiny. Each deletion was small in isolation, but together they formed a portrait of someone who treated truth like a disposable prop. The words were bait for attention, not commitments to principle. Reporters tried to pin him down. "Do you stand by what you said?" they asked after one particularly inflammatory post disappeared. Kirk smiled, deflected, and launched into a new topic. Interviews ended without clarity, leaving audiences with the unsettling sense that nothing he said was meant to last. Behind the curtain, his media empire expanded. Conferences, book deals, and fundraising events multiplied. He cultivated connections with influential politicians and donors, presenting himself as a fearless young voice of the movement.
To many of his followers, the deletions barely mattered. They admired his willingness to say what others would not, even if the evidence later vanished. But in the age of screenshots and cloud backups, erasure is never complete. Activists, journalists, and digital archivists quietly saved the receipts. They cataloged each post, noting the timestamps, the sudden disappearances, the contradictions between what Kirk claimed today and what he had tweeted yesterday. The contradiction became his signature, bold pronouncements followed by strategic retreats, public certainty shadowed by private caution. It was a dance that allowed him to inflame debate without ever standing still long enough to be pinned down. For years, the tactic worked. Cable segments came and went. Social media moved on to the next storm. Kirk remained unscathed, his brand intact, his following loyal. The deletions were treated as quirks of the medium, nothing more than the cost of doing business in the digital age. But every deleted tweet carried a quiet risk. Each deletion planted a seed of doubt about his integrity, a question that lingered in the minds of viewers who wondered what he truly believed, and each screenshot stored by watchful eyes was a fuse waiting to be lit. By the time he entered the congressional hearing room to face questions from Representative Jasmine Crockett, that fuse had grown long and dry, ready for the smallest spark. He may have believed the past was buried, that the endless churn of the internet had swallowed his missteps whole. Those deleted messages were meant to disappear. But the internet never forgets.
Long before the cameras turned toward her, Jasmine Crockett learned how to stand her ground in rooms that weren't built for her. She grew up in a modest Dallas neighborhood where neighbors looked out for one another, and where her parents, both public school teachers, spoke of justice as if it were a living thing that required daily care. Dinnertime conversations mixed lesson plans with lessons in fairness. If you see something wrong, her mother would say, you fix it, even if your voice shakes. Those words sank deep. In high school, Jasmine found her own voice on the debate team. She wasn't the loudest speaker, but she understood rhythm and precision. Judges leaned in as she dismantled arguments with calm logic, never needing to raise her volume. Friends recall how she'd finish a round with a quiet smile, already thinking about the next challenge. Winning trophies mattered less than proving that truth could stand on its own. College brought new tests. At the University of North Texas, she balanced 2 jobs with a full course load, tutoring classmates who struggled while fighting for resources many students took for granted. When a state budget cut threatened scholarships for first-generation students, she helped organize peaceful demonstrations and negotiated directly with administrators. It was her first taste of advocacy beyond the classroom, a glimpse of how policy could shape or shatter lives. Law school sharpened that instinct into a craft. Nights stretched long in the library as she immersed herself in constitutional law and civil rights history. She interned at legal aid clinics where clients arrived frightened and nearly invisible to the system. One evening, after winning an emergency housing injunction for a single mother and her children, Jasmine walked out into the humid Texas night and realized she'd found her purpose: to fight for those whose voices were easiest to ignore. Her career as a defense attorney became a proving ground. She represented clients who had been written off, people caught in cycles of poverty, addiction, or racial profiling. In cramped courtrooms, she faced prosecutors with deeper pockets and heavier caseloads, yet her preparation was relentless. She dissected evidence, challenged questionable stops, and reminded juries that every defendant was a human being deserving of dignity. Colleagues marveled at her stamina and her ability to stay calm when the stakes were life-altering. "She doesn't flinch," one fellow attorney said. "It's like watching someone channel steel." But courtroom victories were never enough. Jasmine saw how systemic problems, underfunded schools, unequal access to health care, gerrymandered districts, kept returning clients to the same traps. She began mentoring young activists and speaking at community centers, translating legal jargon into plain language so neighbors could fight for their own rights. Her weekends filled with town hall meetings, her evenings with strategy sessions for local campaigns. When an open seat in the Texas House of Representatives appeared, community leaders urged her to run. At first, she hesitated. Politics looked messy, a place where ideals were too easily bargained away.
But she also knew that laws decided in distant chambers shaped the lives of every client she defended. After a long night of reflection, she filed the paperwork. Her campaign was as grassroots as it gets. Door-knocking, church basements, borrowed folding chairs. Volunteers from every background joined. Immigrant parents who saw in her a champion, college students hungry for change, lifelong residents tired of being ignored. Jasmine spoke of healthcare, education, and voting rights with the same clarity she once brought to closing arguments. She won not by courting donors, but by convincing neighbors that their voices carried power. In the legislature, she quickly earned a reputation for meticulous preparation and fearless questioning. She read every bill line by line, exposed loopholes, and challenged colleagues who tried to slip discriminatory measures into innocuous-looking proposals. Reporters noted how she combined courtroom discipline with a teacher's patience, explaining complex issues so constituents could follow every move. Her rise to Congress followed the same pattern: steady work, deep roots, no shortcuts. When national leaders searched for a candidate who could bridge local authenticity with national urgency, Jasmine's name rose to the top. She carried into Washington the same battered briefcase she had used as a defense attorney, a quiet reminder of where she began. For her supporters, Jasmine became more than a representative. She was proof that resilience could outlast cynicism. Immigrant families saw in her a guardian of opportunity. Young lawyers found inspiration in her refusal to be intimidated. Even those who disagreed with her politics respected her command of facts and her unwavering focus on justice. But she remained, in heart, the same woman who once sat at her parents' dinner table learning that fairness requires courage. When threats of political retaliation came, she answered with preparation, not bluster. When cameras swarmed, she treated them as incidental to the work. The law is the law, but truth is the foundation beneath it. That foundation carried her into the hearing room where Charlie Kirk waited. She knew his reputation, knew the headlines and the carefully deleted words, but she also knew the weight of every client who had trusted her to fight when odds were long. This was not a place for theatrics. It was another courtroom, and the stakes were democracy's own credibility. Her years in the courtroom prepared her for this very night, when truth itself would be on trial.
The committee room tightened like a drum as the formal questioning began. Microphones crackled with the faint hiss of feedback, a sound sharp enough to raise the hairs on the back of every neck. Charlie Kirk leaned forward first, eager, elbows planted on the table as if staking territory. His voice came fast, confident, threaded with the cadence of a seasoned provocateur. "Representative Crockett," he began, "what we have here is nothing but political theater. The American people are tired of these charades." His words snapped through the air like thrown stones. Cameras shifted toward him, capturing the practiced grin that followed. Crockett did not flinch. She sat upright, hands folded neatly, her gaze steady and unreadable. The contrast was striking, his restless energy against her quiet poise. Kirk pressed on, layering talking points into a torrent meant to dominate the floor. "You talk about accountability," he said, voice rising, "but where is your accountability for the chaos your policies create? Where is the outrage when your allies mislead the public?" He punctuated each question with a pointed jab of his finger, as though sheer motion could drive his arguments home. Reporters scribbled notes, pens scratching like insects in the hush that followed each burst. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere in the gallery a phone buzzed and was swiftly silenced. Crockett's eyes never wavered. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured, almost gentle, a deliberate counterpoint to Kirk's staccato. "Mr. Kirk," she said, "I believe the American people are indeed tired of evasion and half-truths. That's why we're here today." Her calm seemed to slow the air itself. Kirk blinked, then chuckled, a quick exhale meant to reassert control. "Half-truths? Please! I stand by my record." "Your record," she repeated, letting the words settle like dust. That's precisely what we're here to discuss. The room shifted. Viewers at home could almost feel the change through their screens, a subtle tightening, a pull towards something inevitable. Kirk sensed it too. He launched into another volley, citing crowd sizes and social media metrics, a cascade of self-justification that sounded louder than it was. But Crockett's silence between his sentences became its own kind of argument. Each pause stretched a little longer until his words began to echo against it. Representative, you can't intimidate me with innuendo. If you have something to say, say it. Crockett tilted her head slightly as though considering a complex equation. I prefer to let evidence speak. A murmur rippled through the audience. Camera operators traded quick glances, zooming tighter on her composed expression. The microphone nearest Kirk emitted a soft pop, a reminder of the fragile equipment straining to catch every word. He leaned back, folding his arms in mock patience. Evidence? Go ahead. Enlighten us. For a heartbeat, the room fell utterly still. Even the fluorescent hums seemed to recede. Crockett reached for her glass of water, took a slow sip, and set it down, with the care of a surgeon. This simple gesture carried more weight than any speech. Outside the chamber, social media feeds lit up. Viewers tweeted about the tension, the way Kirk's bravado seemed to falter against her silence. Hashtags bloomed like sudden fireworks. Inside, Kirk tapped a pen against the table, an impatient rhythm. Well, he said, voice a shade too loud. Crockett's reply was almost a whisper, yet it carried to the furthest corner. Patience, Mr. Kirk. Facts deserve their moment. Her eyes lowered briefly to the leather folder beside her, fingers brushing the edge as though testing the grain. This gesture drew every gaze. Reporters leaned forward, lenses clicking in rapid succession. Kirk straightened, a flicker of uncertainty betraying his practiced calm. The room's collective breath hung suspended, the expectation so dense it seemed to bend the fluorescent light. Then, with a calm that silenced the room, she reached for the folder that changed everything.
The chamber seemed to contract as Jasmine Crockett's fingers settled on the folder. A single breath passed through the room, collective and sharp, like the moment before a storm breaks. Cameras tightened their focus, the faint whir of lenses audible in the hush. She opened the folder with deliberate care, revealing a stack of crisp pages. Each sheet was heavy with inked text and time-stamped headers. Mr. Kirk, she began, her voice steady, you've assured this committee and the American public that you stand by your record. She let the statement linger, a faint echo bouncing off the marble walls. Let's examine that record. The first page rose slowly from the folder, held between manicured fingers. Crockett read aloud, each word distinct, a quote in which Kirk had mocked refugees, questioning their humanity with a casual cruelty. The tweet had vanished from his timeline months ago, but here it was, captured, archived, undeniable. Gasps erupted from the gallery. A few startled whispers darted like minnows across the silence. On the far side of the room, a reporter's keyboard clattered furiously. Kirk shifted in his seat, a tight smile forming and breaking in the span of a heartbeat. Representative, he said, aiming for nonchalance. Old posts taken out of context mean nothing. Everyone knows social media isn't perfect. Crockett's raised hand stopped him cold. Context is exactly why we're here, she replied. Let's continue. The second sheet emerged. She read another deleted post, this one spreading an unfounded claim about voter fraud, complete with a hashtag that had since become a rallying cry for conspiracy. Murmurs swelled into a low rumble. Viewers watching live streamed the words across their own feeds, screenshots of the evidence already multiplying. Kirk's shoulders stiffened. He reached for the microphone, then thought better of it, fingers retreating. A bead of sweat glinted along his temple under the bright committee lights. Crockett turned a page with a soft rustle that somehow carried like a thunderclap. Here, she continued, you dismiss the deaths of migrant children as, quote, collateral politics. A sharp intake of breath swept through the crowd. Phones tilted upward in a forest of recording screens. Kirk opened his mouth, but the sound that came was little more than a strained chuckle. Representative, anyone can fabricate, except these. Crockett cut in, holding the printout aloft. These are archived by multiple independent platforms. They are your words, preserved exactly as you wrote them. The gallery reacted like a living organism, gasps folding into murmurs, murmurs into a low chant of disbelief. Across the country, hashtags surged, hashtag receipts don't delete, hashtag Kirk exposed, hashtag Crockett mic drop. Crockett allowed the noise to crest before speaking again. This committee is not a stage for erasure, she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of a closing argument. Public discourse demands accountability. Deleting does not undo the harm, and it does not rewrite history. She placed the first 3 pages on the table, squared their edges, and reached for another. One more, she said, almost softly. The words were less a threat than a promise. This time, the tweet was a direct attack on civic participation, a late-night post urging followers to, in his own phrasing, make it impossible for certain people to vote. The line struck like a hammer. Audible gasps rose to the rafters. Kirk shifted again, the confident posture slipping. He tugged at his collar, cleared his throat, and reached for a water bottle that wasn't there. Crockett paused, letting the silence bloom. These are not youthful indiscretions, she said. They are choices. Words matter, and the people who look to you for leadership deserve honesty, not a disappearing act. For a long moment, the only sounds were the soft clicks of cameras and the muddled rush of air conditioning. Kirk finally leaned into the microphone, voice thin. Representative, this is a political hit job. You're cherry-picking. Your own words, Mr. Kirk. She interjected. No cherries required. Laughter rippled through the audience, brief but cutting. Reporters' pens flew. The trending hashtags exploded again, climbing into global ranks. Crockett gathered the remaining papers into the folder, tapping them into a precise stack. The sharp clap of aligned pages echoed like a gavel strike. She spoke again, her tone almost gentle, but edged with resolve. This committee is about accountability, something every public figure owes the people they claim to serve. Deleted words do not disappear from memory, nor from consequence. The room held its breath. Kirk shifted once more, a man suddenly smaller beneath the lights. And just when everyone thought she was finished, she delivered the final receipt. The echoes of Jasmine Crockett's final words had barely faded when the first ripple hit the digital ocean. Within minutes, hashtags surged like a breaking tide. Receipts don't delete leapt to the top of X's trending list, followed by Crockett mic drop and a blunt Kirk exposed. Screens across the country pulsed with screenshots of the very tweets Kirk had tried to erase, each image a digital indictment impossible to ignore. Clips of the exchange flooded feeds at lightning speed. A single 30-second video of Crockett's calm takedown hit 1 million views before the committee adjourned. By nightfall, that number had multiplied tenfold, drawing reactions from every corner of the political spectrum. Journalists raced to capture the drama. The Washington Post called it a masterclass in political accountability. On cable news, a normally reserved anchor declared, Representative Crockett didn't just win the moment, she redefined it. Even outlets traditionally wary of progressive firebrands admitted the performance was undeniably commanding. Celebrities added their voices, amplifying the story to audiences far beyond the Beltway. Actor America Ferrera tweeted, "This is leadership. Jasmine Crockett shows how truth cuts through the noise." Musician John Legend reposted the viral clip with a single word, receipts. From late-night stages, the jokes wrote themselves. One host quipped,
Charlie Kirk learned tonight that the delete button doesn't work on Congress. Laughter roared across living rooms nationwide. But it wasn't just famous names. Everyday viewers filled comment threads with their own takes, praising Crockett's composure and precision. A teacher in Phoenix wrote, "My students are watching this and learning what integrity looks like." A mother in Chicago posted, "Finally someone who won't let the loudest voice rewrite the truth." Immigrant advocates hailed the moment as proof that careful preparation could overpower demagoguery. Memes sprouted like wildflowers. One showed Crockett dropping a manila folder onto a table as comic book sound effects, boom, flashed across the frame. Another superimposed Kirk's startled expression over the caption, "When you realize screenshots are forever." By the next morning, the images had traveled through WhatsApp groups from Lagos to Lahore, the moment transcending U.S. politics to become a global parable about accountability in the digital age. Political figures on both sides were forced to respond. Progressive leaders celebrated the Congresswoman's courage. "This is why we fight for transparency," tweeted a fellow representative, adding a clip of Crockett's last line. Moderates and even a few conservatives expressed grudging respect. One Republican strategist admitted on a morning panel, "Like her or not, Crockett demonstrated what oversight is supposed to look like." Donations to Crockett's re-election campaign spiked within hours, small-dollar contributions pouring in from first-time donors across the country. Her office confirmed that messages of support arrived in dozens of languages. Staffers compared the surge to a flash flood of democracy, a phrase that became its own hashtag. Meanwhile, Kirk faced a very different tide. Sponsors of his speaking tour quietly paused upcoming events. Conservative talk shows that once championed him opened segments with uneasy disclaimers. One national outlet ran the headline, "Kirk under fire as deleted tweets resurface, again." His attempt to brush off the controversy with a late-night live stream only fueled the conversation. Every defensive phrase became a fresh meme. But the most enduring impact wasn't the spectacle, but the conversation it sparked. Editorial boards debated whether social platforms should preserve deleted posts for public figures. College forums hosted late-night discussions about accountability in the algorithm era. High school civics teachers built lesson plans around the hearing, asking students to consider what democracy demands of its loudest voices. In immigrant households, Crockett's poise resonated deeply. Parents who had built new lives in America watched her stand firm and saw a validation of their own hard journeys. Community leaders spoke of a shared heartbeat, proof that dignity and preparation could outlast bluster. As dawn broke the next day, the marble halls of Congress stood quiet again, but the country remained electrified. The clip continued to dominate timelines, the sound of Crockett's calm voice replaying on endless loops. Journalists noted that few committee hearings ever reached the status of cultural event. This one had become something more, a turning point in how Americans understand the permanence of their words. Those deleted messages were meant to disappear, but the internet never forgets, and now neither would the nation.